as we look at what's happening here in Jerusalem, as Nehemiah is trying to rebuild the walls, as he is working on trying to get everything put together there, this rebuilding of the walls, this task that Nehemiah is in charge with, that he is leading the nation of Israel through, is an absolute crucial step. Absolutely crucial step in the safety and prosperity of Jerusalem and the tribe of Judah, and Judah all in itself. Okay, it is an absolute crucial step. It is necessary. It must happen. However, as you might remember, there's been oppression. There's been attacks. Therefore, there has been a need for, rather than people leave the city and go down into their homes, last week we found out that there was a need for people to stay in Jerusalem and not go home. Right? The men would leave home, they'd go to Jerusalem to help build some of the walls, and Nehemiah said, because of the attackers, because of violence and potential death, because of all that's involved, we need all hands on deck all the time. For a while, don't go home. Stay at work, stay here, sleep here in the walls, and don't make yourself vulnerable by traveling at night and early in the morning. Now, with that in mind, that created a problem now. Though it was a necessary order, it was not a sinful order. Sometimes you got to say no to family and yes to ministry. Sometimes that has to happen, as long as you also have the opposite happening. You say no to ministry and yes to family. There needs to be balance there. Okay, this is one of those rare times that it's stay away from home for a while, stay here, we got to get the job done. We need guards, we need lookouts, we need protection and security, we need sword carriers, we need shield carriers, we need water suppliers, everything. Because of that, an already economic hard time, because there's a famine in the land and everything else is going on, okay, an already economically difficult time is being made worse. Because what happens to those homes outside of the walls of Jerusalem? What are they not getting? They are not getting their husbands and the dads returning. And when the dads do not return, that means they are not bringing with them food. That means they are not bringing with them supplies and money, if you will. They are not able, those that own land outside of Judah, outside of Jerusalem, they are not able to go home and tend their land. They're not able to help with the harvest. Now the wives and the children are having to do all the work themselves. Okay, so this is making a very economically difficult time. And with that type of issue at play, guess what ends up happening? Complaints. People come to Nehemiah and they complain. Okay, they're tweeting him, they're Facebooking him, saying, Nehemiah, we have problems. That brings us to verse number 1. Okay, there was a widespread outcry from the people and their wives against their Jewish countrymen. Some were saying, we, our sons and our daughters are numerous. Let us get grain so that we can eat and live. In other words, we're not getting food home. We're not able to get harvesting of the lands. And all our people, they're suffering and they're starving. And we can help. Just let us be able to leave or something. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and homes to get grain during the famine. Okay, so here's what's happening in this really, really rough time. Okay, some people, their meals are dependent upon the husbands turning home. That's group number 1, okay? Then there's group number 2, where these are the people that their fields are actually mortgaged in order to survive. Now, here's how this works. You don't have enough income, you have high expenses, so you mortgage your fields, okay? You basically say, hey, if you give me money and food to survive, I will let you basically temporarily own my fields until I can buy it back, until I can pay off my debt. And usually there's a little bit of interest added to that, because there's interest added when you borrow money like from a bank. Now, usually, even during famine times, usually they're able to have their fields and their debts paid off by late September. However, this wall project is taking place during the months of August and September, which means then that the husbands, when they're having mortgaged their fields so the families and them can live, now they're not able to work their fields and get income for 2 months. What would it be like for your home if you didn't get income for 2 months? Okay, and everything else worked accordingly, and all the bills still came in, right? That's what they're dealing with, and this is a real difficult, absolute, serious situation. There is real threat for foreclosure here. Real threat that the men that are helping do God's work are going to lose their homes, their fields, their crops, their livestock, everything. Okay, there is real foreclosure threat here. And since there's a famine in the land, you saw that in verse 3? Since there's a famine in the land, what do you think happens as a result of famine? Verse 4, glad you asked. So others were saying, we have borrowed money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. So what does the leadership do when there's an increase of demand and shortage of supply? When there's high drought and everything's bottoming out and the income's bottoming out, what does the empire do? What do leadership and government do? Yeah, they bring the taxes up. Okay, out comes the heavy taxes at that point. They increase that. Okay, because the government has their expenses, and the Persian kings love to party. Okay, so they raise up the taxes. So now the people are like, man, because of the taxes with this famine and all that's going on, we got lower income, our expenses are increasing, we're putting our homes and our lives into foreclosure, we're selling our children into slavery. And this isn't slavery like this that's necessarily forced. It's not like a company or a culture is coming into another country, stealing people out and going. These are people who say, you know what, I don't have money, I have a problem, we're starving. My children can work for you for free to pay off the debt. And that's what they do. And so it's called selling them into slavery, where the children become unpaid workers for the sake of paying off the debt. But there's a problem that ends up happening. Whenever you do this, whenever this takes place, comes the potential for a problem. And that problem is known as usury. It's a problem of usury. Verse 5, when we and our children are just like our countrymen and their children, yet we are subjecting our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters are already enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and vineyards belong to others. So here's what's happening. Wealthy Jews own a lot of land, and they own a lot of crops and a lot of livestock, and even though the famine hits, they're doing all right because they got such a surplus that a decrease, they still get a profit. Now the poor people, however, are not so fortunate. That famine hits and they lose a lot of their crops and whatnot, they really don't have enough for additional supplemental income. So that's where they go into mortgage and go into all of that and go into some forms of financial slavery. Then they get charged interest and all this, and the taxes go up. And what happens is even when you're in debt, even with the children sold, the expenses are still higher than the income. And so though you're paying off the debt, you're paying it off slower than what the interest is requiring. So let's say you're $1,000 in debt, you try to pay that off, but it has a 5% interest, and then you're only able to make as an income 2.5% of that interest. And so therefore you had 2.5% interest happening over and over and over and over again. Okay, so now you're paying off the debt, but really that debt's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Okay, these are like people who have credit card debt and they don't make the payments and they make less. If you pay the minimum monthly payment of a credit card debt, it almost equals your interest payment. You don't pay anything off of the principal. And if you make less than that monthly payment, your debt gets deeper and deeper and deeper. Okay, and that's what's happening in this case, is that their debt is growing. Okay, and in addition to all of this, by the way, they're trying to rebuild the walls and defend from oppressors. In addition to all of trying to figure out the finances and the debt and the slavery and the stress, the emotional turmoil, even with all that going on, they're still trying to build the wall. They're still trying to do the Christian walk, if you will. They're still trying to serve and to work. And so what they're doing is they're balancing poverty on one hand and ministry on the other hand, and it's taking a toll on the people. They're getting exhausted. They're getting stressed out. They're losing their energy. They got no money, and they're taking up all their time. It's like they can't even work more because they're trying to build this wall so that everybody can be safe and they can worship and be an independent nation again, and yet they're losing money, and they're losing their homes, and they're starving. That doesn't sound like anything that happens in our country anymore, does it? We don't have any problems in our country regarding balancing the issues of poverty and increased expenses and decrease in income versus trying to somehow do ministry and serve Christ. We don't struggle like that, do we? I think you can tell that when we look at Nehemiah, we can relate very, very well. That Nehemiah has this great potential to speaking to our everyday life because we're so much like the people emotionally, even in our financial situation. I know many of us within our congregation alone just struggle to make ends meet, and we got income and we got expenses, and they just sometimes don't match in a given month. And you wonder, where is the money going to come from to be able to pay off this bill and to also support certain types of lifestyle? And how am I going to balance this out? And now the pastor is asking that we try to serve Jesus and all of this. And he's asking for our time and our energy and to sacrifice. This is horrible. Horrible study. Why are we doing Nehemiah? This is horrible. And now we come to chapter 5 where these people understand where you're at. This is what Israel is struggling with, this exact dynamic. And this really brings us to an opportunity just for me to remind you about something. It's just a good chance for us to evaluate this. And this is the best I've ever had, a situation like what's happening in Scripture, especially during this time period that also relates to life. The best explanation is this, that there's 4 types of people. That you got the righteous rich. The people who have a lot of money, a lot of income, they're wealthy, and they're righteous. They're godly. I know we don't know where those people are right now, do we? But there are righteous rich, okay? Then there's the unrighteous rich. These are the people that have a lot of money and a lot of income, but they're not godly. They're not godly at all. Sometimes they might have legally and properly earned their money, sometimes not. Sometimes they did it by taking advantage of others and squandering others and reducing benefits for their own pocketbook and things along those lines, and shady business deals and ethical dilemmas. And sometimes they just make good money because of the jobs they're doing and all the work that they do and the investments they make, but they're just not godly people. They use the money not for the ministry and not for church stuff and not for glorifying God, but for pretty much their own financial gain for whatever that is. Then you go to the poor, and you got the righteous poor and the unrighteous poor. Okay, the righteous poor would be those that they struggle to make ends meet. Tend to be a lot of times single moms. People like that fall into that category within churches. But they're righteous and they're poor. They're godly. It's not like they're spending their money on drugs, and it's not like they're spending their money on booze and gambling and lottery tickets. But they are following Jesus to the best of their ability, and they're trying to honor him with their life, and that is their heart. They just don't have income. They don't have a lot of it. So they're righteous poor. Then there's the unrighteous poor, those that are not trying to follow Jesus, that have low income, and when they do get money, they blow it in a couple days. They get like maybe a Social Security check, and normally that check would be able to cover rent and food and a couple of expenses, but instead they go to a local casino or a local bar, and they just blow it. And then 3 days later, they're getting evicted from their place, and where'd all your money go? Well, I don't know. I don't know where it went. Yeah, you do. You drank it, you spent it, you gambled it. And they're just unrighteous poor. So those are the basic dynamics of what's taking place. We got the righteous rich and unrighteous rich, the righteous poor and unrighteous poor. And within Scripture, the goal is not rich or poor. The goal is righteousness. The goal is to be righteous, a Christ follower, whether rich or poor. That's the goal. And many times people try to make rich or poor their goal. They think that to be poor is good and to be rich is bad. It's called poverty theology. And then some people flip that around. To be rich is good and be poor is bad. And they call it prosperity theology. Okay, and the goal is not rich or poor. The goal is righteousness. That's the goal. Okay, we're always going to have poor people. We're always going to have rich people. That's just how the world is. And the goal is righteousness, to follow Jesus and to be committed to Jesus. Okay, so that's what we're dealing now. With Nehemiah here, with this problem of usury, what categories are we dealing with here? It appears to be we have the potential of unrighteous rich taking advantage of the righteous poor. That's what it seems like might be going on here. That you got the unrighteous rich, or at least the rich, if they're righteous and they're following Jesus or they're following God, then they aren't acting like it appropriately, okay? Then we have what appears to be unrighteous rich taking advantage of unrighteous poor. Of course, that doesn't happen in our society today, does it? We don't have the righteous rich, unrighteous rich taking advantage of righteous poor, do we? Is that happening in our country? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. All the time across corporate America. We have that all over the place, where we got a lot of wealthy people that don't give two hoots about God or the things of Jesus, and yet they are setting things up in economic situations that really hurt and almost financially oppress poor people. Okay, it really, really is difficult. I know there's a lot of politics and this and that and how business ethics works. I know there's a lot of complications, not as simple as that. But for the most part, we're looking at, in several cases, unrighteous rich taking advantage of the righteous poor. So how do we respond to something like that? How do you respond when you know that you're getting a pay cut, but yet a bonus check goes out to the VPs and all that type of stuff's going on? And so you're getting less income, but they're getting more income, and they're cutting your benefits, but they're increasing their perks, and on. That divide keeps growing. How's that response? What do you feel inside? What emotions comes to play? When you look and you're trying to figure out, wow, at the end of tax season, I suddenly owe more than what I even have in my bank to begin with. What do I do about this? And up comes various emotions. You know, knowing that they're talking about increasing the price of meat by almost $1.50 to $2 a pound. And they're talking about increasing milk by $1.50 to $2, maybe even $3 per gallon because of a cow shortage in California. And that's supposed to be taking place this summer. And people hear this and they respond with various emotions. And they respond with fear, anger. They respond with despair, hopelessness. What can I possibly do? Now I can't even afford meat. I can't even afford milk on my income. You know, and then they start trying to figure out, what if we up minimum wage? That'll help. But then we find out that 99% of the people who are the main breadwinners of their home don't even make minimum wage. They make more than that. So raising minimum wage doesn't really solve the issue. It just makes everything else worse. And so then that doesn't seem like it's the answer. And then people fight back and forth. But here's the thing. Here's what Nehemiah does. Nehemiah hears about this situation of usury. He hears about what's happening to the Jews, that they are actually having their land owned by other Jews, and those other rich Jews are charging interest, and a high interest at that, and they're getting richer, and the poor Jews are getting poorer and facing foreclosure at the hands of their brothers, people just like them. Okay, so Nehemiah hears this. And he says this, verse 6, I became extremely angry. Isn't that nice to know? Isn't that nice to know that Nehemiah, a godly individual, a righteous man, sees what's happening to the poor people, and he says, and I became extremely angry. He is ticked off. Okay, he is extremely angry when I heard their outcry and their complaints. Okay, it's just so encouraging, because anger is sometimes so shunned upon in our society. People say, well, you shouldn't get angry. We should feel angry. We should, at times, especially when injustice is happening. When injustice is taking place, there should be anger. A child gets molested, there should be anger. Okay, someone takes advantage and robs and abuses someone else, there should be anger. Okay, anger can be a very motivating, inspiring force. We should have anger. The question then is not, how do we suppress our anger? That is not the question a Christian should ask. Not how do we suppress our anger. Rather, the question is, how do we direct our anger in a godly manner? That's our question. How do we, in our anger, not sin? Okay, how do we direct our anger in a godly manner? Here's what Nehemiah does. He starts off here in verse 7. After seriously considering the matter. Let's pause there. After seriously considering the matter. Some translations read it like this. After taking counsel within myself. Isn't that a great phrase? After taking counsel in myself or within myself. AKA, what this really means is he took a breather and chilled for a while. Or as a song, I was watching a show with my daughter. It's about this Henry the Tiger. And he had this song. What is it? Daniel the Tiger, thank you. It's Daniel the Tiger based off of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Okay, so Daniel the Tiger is singing this song that was, when you get real mad and you want to roar, take a breath and count to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Isn't that nice? That's what Nehemiah's doing. Okay, he's not singing that song, but that's what he's doing. Okay, he's taking. Here's what happened. A lot of people they have quick tempers. They get angry from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, and they respond rashly out of that anger. Okay, that's their first response is to yell, scream, shout. Their first response is to hit, throw, attack, whatever, and they get angry. Someone says something, oh yeah, and they just fight right into it. They're just like, it's like they're a dynamite with a pair of scissors with the fuse cut, and all you got is a little itty bitty, you light the fuse and poof, it blows up in your face. That's what some people are like. And what we need to do is when you get angry, the issue is not that anger may or may not be sinful. The issue is, what are you going to do with that anger? And so you got to step back for a moment before responding. Before doing any decisions whatsoever, you need to do, as Daniel the Tiger says, you need to take a deep breath and give yourself some time. Take some moment to be able to first calm down and to gather the facts. Ponder the situation. Okay, ponder it. Try to figure out what is all happening here. What's going on? Is the report that you received even accurate? Is the situation as you're seeing it truly what it is? Or is somebody misrepresenting the data? Is somebody misrepresenting the truth and adding a little bit of falsehood in it or slanting it from a biased point of view to serve their benefit? What is really going on? Okay, because in all honesty, here's what happens. We as human beings have what psychologists like to call hindsight bias and overconfidence. Okay, that's what we have. And I think the psychologists are right on this, that we have hindsight bias and overconfidence. Here's how this works, in case you were curious. Oh, good. Glad you're asking. So here's how this works. Here's how hindsight bias works, that a person has an intuition. You guys have intuition, right? You just suddenly begin to know something. And you feel pretty confident about your intuition. I know this to be true. I know this person's thinking this. I know this person has this motive, though they've not explicitly said it. I know they have this motive. Well, how do you know? Because I know the person. Well, what you're dealing with is not actually legal, true, scientific evidence. What you're dealing with is intuition, of which you're very confident of. Now, here's what happens. So you're making a prediction. You're either predicting the heart of another person, or you're predicting how an event's going to turn out, or something along those lines. That's what that intuition is. It's a prediction. It's, I know this. How do you know this? I don't know. I just know. Well, you're making a prediction that you're right. Okay, now, should it, by chance, from the fluke of nature, God's sense of humor, or the fact that we live in a sinful, fallen world, that you end up being right, what happens is, the person, when they find out that they were right, they make this statement: I knew it all along. You ever said those words? I knew it all along. Knew it. All this time, I knew it. I had this thought and this thought, and I knew it. Then that's called hindsight bias. Okay, that's called hindsight bias. Then comes the overconfidence. We trust our intuition all the more. And suddenly we think that we know people and that we can make a judgment without the data at all, and we could draw a conclusion, and that conclusion is right. And therefore, I can make decisions and reactions and statements and choices based upon that intuition alone. You know what happens at that point? Pride. And you screw it all up because nobody knows the heart of another person except God and that person. We can be accurate, we can predict accurately, and it's just by happen chance that can happen. And some people can say, well, I've been right about this person 1,800 times. Well, that's nice. You can still be wrong now. It is entirely possible. Okay, you can't be overconfident on your intuition. So when we're dealing with our anger, a lot of times our hindsight bias and our overconfidence elevates. Our anger causes thoughts in our head, and if we don't control those, we let them play out scenarios and conversations and situations and circumstances, and we play out movies like a reel in our head. And it's like a movie where you say, and then this happened. Nope, it didn't. This happened instead. And then this choice was made. Oh, actually this choice. This is even better. And we play out all these. It's like those books that you can read that says if you want to make this choice, go to page whatever. And if you want to make this choice, go to page whatever. Ever read those as a kid? Those are fun little books. We play a story like that in our head. And then that story becomes our intuition. And it's from our intuition. And we believe it to be true. In fact, we're confident in it. Then in our anger, we respond and react. And we react hurtfully, sinfully, vengefully. We react in a way that is not building of a relationship, that is not based on all the facts, and is based more out of an emotional anger and defending of self and what I think is my own benefit. We respond out of that rather than how can I help this person be more closer to God? How can I help them be more righteous? How can I help there be redemption and healing here? Instead, it becomes out of anger and vengeance. And we need to just step back from the situation. We need to step back from it for a moment. And we need to do a couple of P's. Okay, we need to do a couple of P's. We need to pause, pray, and ponder. You like that? Okay. And in fact, sometimes I can just see this now. I can just see this now because I'm weird with my tongue sometimes. When I'm really, really stressed out and angry, I can see myself just kind of pushing back a little bit. And I'm just trying to figure things out. And Rachel comes and goes, "What are you doing?" I can say, "I'm peeing." And I'll be just real determined. I can just see this happening. Rachel's going to be like, should I be concerned? I can just see this happening. I really can. It's my intuition talking. Okay, but pause, pray, ponder. Okay, this is so helpful in pondering the facts. What is the real facts? Like, for example, just because a woman is crying or a child is crying does not mean they are a victim. Okay? I know so many people that when a woman comes in sobbing and mascara running, they're like, "Oh, ma'am, what's wrong?" "Oh, she tells this horrible story. This guy's a whatever. No. Oh, let's go take care of this guy for you." When come to find out, she's a manipulating little wench. And she's just really a real piece of work. Right? And so she just cries to manipulate people onto her side. And when she does something wrong and goofs something up, she turns around and cries to get sympathy so she's not held accountable for what she just did. Some women are like that. They're just that manipulative. Kids are like that. Kids are like, here's the situation that can happen. You know, kid A doesn't like what kid B is doing, goes up to kid B and punches him. Kid B runs off crying. Kid A turns around, starts crying, and runs home. Now, why is he crying? Is he crying? Oh, well, he feels sad of what he did. Oh, boo-hoo. That is not the case. Oh, he's afraid he's going to get caught. Well, maybe so. But you know what he's going to do when he gets home? He's going to go home and say, he hit me first. And he's going to be crying. And a parent's going to look at their crying child and say, he hit me, and I hit him back. And the parent's going to be like less upset about this, right? Is that child a victim? Nope. You see, we need to really, well, let me take a moment before I get mad at that kid and call the parents and tell them what a jerk child they have. Let me take a moment, pause, pray, and ponder here. Is my child really a victim here? Or did my child bully up some other kid and is now trying to manipulate the situation? I know nobody wants to think that way about their child. My parents didn't, and I was that way sometimes. I'd get in a fight with the neighbor kid, and I'd come home crying, saying they hit me first when they never raised a hand because they were already on the ground. That was the case sometimes. I'd be like, he hit me first, and then I hit him. And they said, well, he said that. My mom at least was good at pondering. She'd call up and say, I just want to know what happened here. And he said, well, my son said that John hit him. But did you hit him? After he hit me, he said he never threw a punch. Well, he just doesn't want to get in trouble. And back and forth and manipulating. And I tell you, I was a piece of work. I'm not looking forward to my son growing up. I am looking forward to it, but I'm scared. If he's half of what I was like, oh boy, I got a handful coming up. My wife and I are going to have fun. So this is what we need to do. Pray, pause, pray, and ponder. So Nehemiah does this. He pauses, he prays, and he ponders. And then he begins to accuse. The rest of verse 7. So I accuse the nobles and officials, saying to them, each of you is charging his countrymen interest. So I called a large assembly against them. It's like a Old Testament version of New Testament church discipline. So he calls a large assembly against them. And Nehemiah said, we have done our best to buy back our Jewish countrymen who were sold to foreigners. But now you sell your own countrymen, and we have to buy them back. Parenthetical statement, what it means is, again. Okay, and they remained silent and could not say a word. So here's what Nehemiah is talking about. That already the Jews were in exile, they were in slavery, they were owned by someone else, by the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire says, we release you and allow you to go back home. And so now they're going back home just to find themselves enslaved by one of their own brothers. Like they're in exile all over again, but this time at home. Okay, what this might look like today would be something like this. Let's say a woman, she's not a Christian, and she's living an exilic type of life, and she has a jerk of a boyfriend. And that boyfriend is using her for sex, and is talking down to her, manipulates her, maybe abuses her verbally, maybe even physically, and then he takes her money. Okay, every money that she makes or whatever she gets from Social Security, he ends up taking and says, okay, hand this over to me and I'll give you what I can out of it. And then he uses her for that. Okay, now this is a horrible situation for her to be in. Let's say she finds Jesus, or she accepts Jesus as Savior and gets saved, ends up at a church, and the church says, hey, this guy is horrible to you. He treats you bad. He's using you for sex and he's taking your money. Just dump the loser. Just dump him, okay? Get rid of him. And so she does. And starts dating a guy in the church who takes her money, uses her for sex, and abuses her physically and mentally. Okay, that's what this is looking like in Israel. Where now they were in slavery in a bad situation, and now they got home, they're free, and they're in slavery in a bad situation. But this time their owner is not a pagan, their owner is a fellow believer and fellow Jew. Okay, now is it bad that a non-Christian man is abusive and manipulative toward a girl? Yes, horrible bad. It's even worse when it happens in the church. It's even worse when a Christian does it, or someone claiming to be a Christian does it. That's even worse. And when charged with that, when Nehemiah goes to them, or if we found that was happening here, that someone in our church, a guy was doing that to a woman, okay, and we charge them. You're doing this. You're no worse than those pagans over there. What are you thinking? Their response should be the same as what this ends with. They remained silent and could not say a word, because there is no defense for that type of behavior. There is no excuse. There is nothing to say. They should be speechless. And so the Jews, the nobles were there, and they hear what's being charged against them, and they are speechless. They are speechless, and they should be speechless, because there is nothing to say to defend such an action. So Nehemiah continues. And what he does now, he gives them a warning and a charge. He really tries to set them straight. Nehemiah's goal here is not vengeance. Nehemiah's goal here is really righteousness. That's what his goal is. And he is very, very clever. It could be real easy to make this a class issue. Hey, you're rich. Look at all the money you got. Why are you taking advantage of the poor people? You know, he could make this a complete financial class issue. That's what he could do. He could make it about upper class and lower class. He could try to, but instead what Nehemiah does is he focuses it all through a theological lens and makes it a community issue. That's what Nehemiah does. Very smart, actually. Very, very smart. Here's what he says. He said, "Then I said," verse 9, "what you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God and not invite the reproach of our foreign enemies?" I love how he starts with this. It's usually translated as, "Don't you fear God?" That's the charge here. Don't you fear God? That's the theological part of this. And when Americans read this, you know what the average American Christian tends to say? Well, not that kind of fear. Every time they see the phrase, fear of the Lord, they always say, well, not that type of fear. Do you think Nehemiah means, shouldn't you be more respectful about God? You think he's being calm that way? No. What type of fear do you think he's talking about?
Bell ringing in the corner.
Yeah, okay, bell ringing in the corner. Shouldn't you fear God? Okay, Dr. Bertrand wrote a book called Rethinking Worldview, and he makes this great observation. It's very shrewd, and you're going to think it's very extreme, but he's a Southern Baptist theologian, and we're just going to have to deal with it, okay? So here's what he wrote. This is his point of view, so you can't yell at me later for it. Okay, I just happen to really agree with it. He says that he loves guns. Okay, I guess you could expect this from a Kentuckian. So he loves guns. He has a reverent and awe-respectful fear, the way Christians like to view fear of the Lord. He has this respectful, reverent, awe-type fear for guns. Okay, he's cautious around them. He works with them, loves them. He respects their power, and he's reverent about how he handles it. But he's never terrified from it until he gets one pointed at him. Then suddenly he's terrified of guns. And he makes this statement then, that Christians tend not to realize that the wrath of God is still existing today. That the wrath of God, though satisfied in Christ, and you will not experience eternal death, you still experience his wrath in this life. Many Christians walk through life thinking that wrath is off the table because of Christ. And his eternal wrath is off the table, but he still, as a loving parent, has wrath to correct you. And that we should still be afraid of God because he is the almighty creator. He is the one who put the heavens and earth into place and breathed life into people. And he is the one that when he wants to punish, it will be something special. And it will be to correct you, but there needs to be that fear. Okay, as a child, I had a disobedient streak. Already covered a little bit of that earlier. Okay, and sometimes I would obey my parents because I loved them and I respected them. Sometimes I obeyed my parents because my dad's belt was looking a little loose that day. Okay, and I knew my mom would be able to say, you do this. And I'd be like, I'm not going to do it. Your father will want you to, well, my dad's not here. You want to wait till your dad gets home? Do you really want me to call your father and have him come? Okay, I'll do it. You know, there was fear there. So Nehemiah's question to the nobles is, on a theological level, do you fear God? Do you understand who you're messing with? You mess with his people, you mess with him. Okay, so the fear of the Lord. He's like, fear God. And you're making things look bad. How's our testimony with the people? We are just like the pagans. What type of testimony are we going to be? They could charge us with being just like them, and you're wrecking the testimony for the rest of us. Another community issue at that point. So theological, do you fear God? Do you recognize he's a God of wrath? Okay, obedience is necessary. And also it's a community issue. When you do not do things appropriately, it wrecks the testimony for the entire group. The one bad apple spoiling the bunch type of a deal. You get yourself a couple of bad Christians and it makes the church look bad. You get yourself a couple of bad churches, it makes the denomination or Christianity look bad. Look how much damage Westboro Baptist has done for Christians across the country with their picketing of funerals and all the things that they do out of anger and hate without any tactfulness or any type of respect or integrity. They're just going at it, and they wreck the image of the church across the country. Okay, that's what it takes. So by all means, obey out of fear of God, and obey so that we don't wreck the reputation of the church. Because you carry that. Every person of the church carries a reputation of the church, the reputation of other Christians, and the reputation of Christianity on them. And how you behave communicates that testimony. It is a very much a theological and a community issue. So how do we respond? How do we respond to this? Here's how this continues. Nehemiah continues. He says, even I, as well as my brothers and my servants, have been lending them money and grain. Please, he begs the nobles, let us stop charging this interest. Return their fields, their vineyards, olive groves, and houses to them immediately, along with the percentage of the money, grain, new wine, and olive oil that you have been assessing them. In other words, Nehemiah is saying, remove their debt and pay back the interest to them. That's Nehemiah's charge. How are they going to respond? The people's response. Verses 12 and 13. It's quite impressive. They responded, yes. That's the short answer. They responded, we will return these things and require nothing more for them. We will do as you say. So I summoned the priests and made everyone take an oath to do this, making sure they don't go back on their word. It's okay not to trust everybody. Okay, so he makes them take a public oath that they're going to do this. And then Nehemiah says, I also shook the folds of my robes. Robes were often folded in such ways as to create pockets. They didn't sew pockets then, so they did folding. Usually a robe was just a big, long, like 9-foot long blanket. Okay, and you'd be able to just unravel yourself, isn't that fun, and then wrap up in it differently to be able to keep warm at night and use it as a blanket. Or you would lay on it and you'd be able to fold it in such ways as to have pockets and pouches and even hidden compartments. My friend Vaughn learned how to fold a kilt that way. He had a kilt that was a big long stretch of fabric. He'd lay in it, wrap it around himself in such ways and fold it in ways that he had a full pleated kilt and all pinned up with a thing, and had pouches, and he even found out how to do it with give himself a hood for when it rained. It's amazing what you can do when you learn how to fold fabric with no life. And so Nehemiah shows up, and he's there, and he's giving them the charge, and he takes his outfit, his cloak, his robe there, and he starts shaking it and fluffing out and undoing all the pockets, so everything in it just falls out. Okay, so a little thimble comes out, an iPod. All these things start just coming out and bouncing across the floor. Right, so Nehemiah shook the folds of his robe and said, may God likewise shake from his house and property everyone who does not keep this promise. May he be shaken out and have nothing. And the whole assembly said, amen. Verily, truly, may it be so. We agree. Amen. And they praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. They returned all the land and canceled all the debt and got rid of all the mortgages, and everything took place. Here's what's amazing about this. Is it in their legal right to accept a mortgage from someone else that's in need? Yes. It's even in Scripture. Okay, Old Testament in Exodus, chapter 20, all the way up through the end of the book, has several passages talking about how to handle the acquiring of land from someone else. In fact, they even get to what's called the year of Jubilee, or every 7th year of the Sabbatic year. The 7th year, all slavery was to be removed, all debt wiped clean, that they could only be in servitude up to 7 years. And at that point, if it's not paid off, you release them. Okay, that's what, in fact, some scholars think that because of that requirement of Semitic year releasing of slaves in the Old Testament, that these nobles, that this had gone beyond 7 years and they were keeping them. That it was servitude was even going beyond that point, that it's a possibility. They had been there before Nehemiah showed up, and that it's just been getting even worse and worse and worse, had been taking place for a really long time. That's a possibility. But either way, we know that it is a legal right. It is a legal right for someone to say, take possession of my fields for a certain type amount of money so I can have a temporary relief from my predicament. It's legally righted, legal right. Nehemiah is asking them to sacrifice a legal right. That's what he's asking them to do. Give up your legal right for a different purpose. Give up your legal right so that we can have this increase in ministry, that we can lower the stress and the burden that's already upon us, that we can work together and honor God in the process. Just sacrifice this legal right. Okay, and they said yes. They said yes. Now, I know we're getting real tight on time now, so I just want to, I'm going to skip this a little bit, and I want to just hit how this impacts the church today. How this is just going to really speak to us, as many of the passages of this was already done. But let me just really help you out. 2 things. One, there are likely personal rights that you legally have access to that might be necessary for you to sacrifice in order to help the ministry of this church grow, in order for it to be successful. That is possible. And then second question is, are you willing then to actually personally sacrifice, even financially, to make that happen? Are you willing to sacrifice some personal rights that are legally yours, but you're going to say that on a theological, maybe even moral, ethical level, you're going to sacrifice those rights to help the ministry grow, and that you're willing to even personally sacrifice, even financially, to help the ministry flourish? Okay, let me just give you a very practical example of what this looks like. I struggled with this for a while, I knew these were the principles, but I wanted a real simple, down-to-earth, easy, poverty-level way of working this out. So here's how this works. First of all, ministry itself requires money to function. Okay, it just does. And ministry is free, by the way. I don't know if you ever thought about that, but our church's ministries are all free. You don't have to pay to hear me speak. Okay, I'm free. This sermon is free, and you're getting what you paid for. Okay, so this is free. You can go to our website. You don't need to type in a password and give a credit card information to have access to our website. Our website is available for free. Okay, you can watch sermons online in case you're sick or to hear something again or because you just really liked it. Okay, and you can watch it again online. And guess how much that costs you? It's free. Okay, when I start my video blogging and toward the end of April, guess how much that's going to cost you? Nothing. It's free. When you're part of our anchor groups and you have the questions that you fill out, all that material and literature is free. I write it for you. Okay, it's everything we do is free to you. Okay, but it all costs money. Okay, it all costs money. My education costs money. To rent out places costs money. To be able to pay for paper costs money. And to have stuff posted online costs money. And on it goes. Okay, ministry costs money. Now, you have the legal right to buy Coca-Cola. You do. Okay, you have the legal right to buy Coca-Cola. Any Coke drinkers? Okay, Diet Coke, that's okay. You can say Diet Coke, no one's perfect. Okay, so, okay, you have the legal right to buy Coca-Cola, all right? And you have the legal right to buy as much as you got money in your account, right? You really do. You have the legal right. No one's going to say, you bought too much. Now, if you can't pay your bill, they'll kick you out of your place, shut off your utilities. But, but you can buy as much Coke as you're legally able to do. Now, are you willing to sacrifice that right to buy Coke? Coca-Cola. Okay, are you willing to sacrifice your right to buy Coca-Cola by so many cans a week? What if you were to say, reduce your amount of Coca-Cola drinking by $3 a week? That'd be two 20-ounce bottles. You're about $1.50, $1.60 a piece. $1.60 when you buy it, but then you get 10 cents back for the little bottle, so $1.50. So $3 is two bottles. Are you willing to reduce your drinking of Coca-Cola by 2 bottles a week, therefore able to give that $3 to the church ministry each week? See how that can work? It would be a way of sacrificing a right that you have. I'm not saying that you have to cut your Coke drinking. I'm not going to tell you about the kidney damage, bladder damage, and sugar diabetes and hypoglycemia that you're going to be causing. I'm not going to be talking about how NutraSweet can cause blackouts and memory retardation and memory recall. I'm not going to talk about all of that. Find that out on your own. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to say you have the legal right to buy and drink Coca-Cola. And I am asking, are you willing to sacrifice that right so that you can come up with $3 per week to give to the ministries of the church here so that we can continue on? See, I'm talking about an issue of really tithing. Talking about an issue of tithing. And here's what tends to happen is that many people, they come to do the church thing and they go and do the life thing and they don't worship with their wallet. Well, they worship with their wallet, all right, just worshiping the wrong God. That's what's happening. They're worshiping the wrong God with their wallet. They are. You look at someone's budget and you look at their expenses and their outcome and all that's going on upon their budget sheets, and you find out that there's no worshiping God there. That's what tends to happen. That is the average, okay? More than 50% of Christians do not tithe. And usually almost always they say, because I don't have the amount of money to tithe. And that's what they keep saying over and over again. And here's what's interesting. And then they start complaining. You're telling me that I gotta give my money to God? That's what you're telling me? And really, on a legal level, that's what that looks like. Okay, legally, you do not have to tithe. Theologically, it's different. Don't you fear God? Because here's what it boils down to is that on a theological level, it is not how much of your money do you give to God. The question is actually how much of God's money are you going to keep? And then what are you going to do with God's money that you are keeping? Because it is all His. He provided it. He gave it. This is why I usually, whenever I do financial counseling with people, I say, here is your income. Even before the government gets its little grips upon it, here is your tithe that you give on a monthly basis. There it is. And then here's the taxes. Now, this is what's left. This is what's called your operating living income. That's what you make your budget on. That's how I do my financial counseling. When I get pre-married couples in and we go through the financial part of it, I say, okay, income, tithing, taxes. What's left is your income for operating expenses. This is for your rent, your utilities, your food, your entertainment, your house, your car, your tires, your clothing. This is where everything else comes from, is from that. Okay, because it's not how much of my money do I give God, but how much of God's money do I keep? And then what are you going to do with God's money that you are keeping? That is the issue. And so many people, we're even noticing amongst our church that our tithing is going down faster than our attendance, which is interesting. That the rate percentage-wise, we know who some of the tithers are, and we know the ones that are leaving. Some of them aren't tithers in the first place, or when they leave, the amount that they usually tithe, which is a fixed amount, is less than what's actually being lost, which means other people are just stopped tithing. And we're kind of finding ourselves in a financial problem. And it's like, man, the ministry costs money. We gotta up. Well, I don't have any money. I just don't have it to give. Fine. Can you cut your Coca-Cola drinking by $3 a week? Let's start there. Let's start there. Oh, ye who has no money but buys a 24-pack on a regular basis, if not weekly. Okay, oh, ye who says you have no money but you're buying cigarettes. Oh, ye who says you have no money but you got new DVDs. Can you cut back just a little bit to be able to say, here is something to help the ministry move forward? The way to word the question would be maybe something a little bit like this. I had heard it said in a commercial, it was a Capital One commercial. They used to say the question, what's in your wallet? Remember those? Theologically, we can ask this. How are you worshiping with your wallet? Let's have a word of prayer.